Keto diet versus low carb diet. Aren't they the same thing? Well, a ketogenic diet is always a low carb diet, but a low carb diet may or may not put you in ketosis. So today we're going to talk about the entire spectrum of carbohydrates from lowest to highest and help you understand where do you need to be in order to meet your health goals, but also to achieve optimum health. Coming right up. I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. If you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. Keto and low carb have become very popular because they're addressing the main problem of our times, which is insulin resistance. When we eat carbohydrates, and especially sugar, we trigger insulin. Insulin's a storage hormone. So most people on a modern diet have become much better at storing calories and fat than to burning calories and fat. Most people have lost the ability to burn fat appropriately because there's so much food and so much sugar available that our insulin levels and our blood sugar levels stay on a constant high. Keto or ketosis or a ketogenic diet, keto is a physiological state. It's what happens when you switch from carbohydrate metabolism to a dominant fat metabolism. When the vast majority of your energy comes from fat, then your body produces ketones. It's a byproduct of that fat burning. And if you have above baseline measurable amounts of ketones, that means you are predominantly burning fat, which is a good thing if you're trying to lose weight or reverse insulin resistance. Most people have to eat somewhere between 20 to 50 grams of net carbs to be in ketosis. And what's a net carb? You take the whole amount, the whole number of carbohydrates in the food, and then you subtract the fiber, because the fiber is something that we don't digest. It is there to fill out, to provide bulk. It gives your intestines some work to do, but you don't absorb it. It provides no blood sugar, no calories, no energy, so we don't count it. We subtract it and end up with net carbs. And if your net carbs are 20 to 50, then for the most part, you're going to be in ketosis. But there will be exceptions. Some people have to do that either for a very long time, or they have to go even lower. 20 to 50 grams on a 2,000 calorie diet means you're eating 4 to 10% of calories from carbohydrate. On the other extreme, on the other end of the spectrum, is the STAD diet, the Standard American Diet. And I know that's totally appropriate acronym. And according to the official guidelines, you should eat 45 to 65% of your calories from carbohydrate. That puts you at 225 to 325 grams of carbs per day. And while that would create problems for a lot of people, it is not outrageously wrong for everybody. What makes it wrong for everybody is the fact that most of the food is processed and there's a lot of sugar and a lot of chemicals in there. As much as 50% of the carbohydrates consumed are sugar, which means the white crystal stuff out of the bag, but also sugar added, like ketchup and cookies and baked goods and salad dressings and so forth. And of course, the high fructose corn syrup in the sweet drinks. So even though a healthy, active person eating whole food could probably tolerate, for the most part, a relatively high level of carbs, it's the sugar that destroys it for us, because the sugar has to be processed mostly by the liver, and it puts pressure, strain, stress on the liver, and we develop fatty liver and insulin resistance. And when that happens, we have broken our carbohydrate processing machine. And once that happened, now we have to become much more drastic in our choices. So there's a difference between maintaining something and reversing something. And most of us have become very insulin resistant. The vast majority of people, over 75% in the Western world, are insulin resistant. And that's because of all the sugar. So now the reason keto and low carb are so popular is that that's the thing that finally addresses the main problem. So some people think that low carb is anything less than the modern diet. And a lot of people think that the modern diet is normal or balanced because that's what they've been eating all their life for the last couple of generations. They don't know anything else. So they think, oh, anything less than that is low carb, which is not the case from the point of view that we're discussing this. If we want to reverse insulin resistance, now we're probably talking about a maximum level of about 100 grams of carbs. So low carb generally in the low carb community is 50 to 100 grams, which would give you 10 to 20% of calories from carbohydrates. So keto versus low carb versus high carb is a continuum. And depending on your situation, your genetics, your lifestyle, your history, you're going to be at a different place. A different place is going to be appropriate for you. So anywhere from 2% carbs on the low end up to maybe 50% carb could be appropriate for a certain person. And it depends on how insulin resistant are you. So while there's a carb continuum, there's an insulin resistance continuum. And we measure this with something called HOMA-IR, Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. And what it does, it takes your fasting glucose, it multiplies it by your fasting insulin, it divides by a constant, and you get a score, a HOMA-IR score. And an optimum value is 1 plus or minus a few tenths. So if you're in that range, you have a very good balance between insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So normal value could be a fasting glucose of 100 and an insulin level of 4 divided by a constant of 4 or 5 gives you approximately 1. Once you get up to 1.5, you're still okay, but you're starting to develop slight insulin resistance. And by the time you get up to 2 or 3 or 4, you start having moderate to severe insulin resistance. At the high end of the scale, we could have people like diabetics that are untreated, meaning they haven't changed anything in their lifestyle. That could be a 10 or higher. But we also want to consider the low end of the scale. Can you be too insulin sensitive? And the answer is yes, because we could be any extreme as possible. Down to about 0.5 is probably okay, but once you start going below 0.5, if you have, for example, a fasting glucose of 80 or 70 and your insulin starts going down below 2.5, now you're probably too insulin sensitive. And in this case, you're probably very lean, you probably are active, and you probably have trouble gaining weight. You might want to gain weight, but you can't. So you're thinking, oh, let me eat a bunch of fat. Let me try the keto diet. And that's probably not going to be the best thing for you. It doesn't mean you have to eat as much as 50% carbs, but you probably shouldn't be keto either. There's probably a better balance for you someplace else on the scale. So you're going to have to play around with that. And what happens if you're too lean, then you don't have enough reserves. If you get a sickness, if you get a cold or a flu, then you don't have a lot of reserves. And you also don't have a lot of fat-soluble vitamins to help your immune system. So there is such a thing as too lean and too insulin sensitive. So the HOMA-IR is an excellent way of assessing insulin resistance, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture. So let's look at a couple of examples here. If we take a diabetic And let's say they wake up with a fasting glucose of 200. And we measure their insulin and it's 20, we compute the score and their HOMA-IR is 10, meaning very insulin resistant. And there's no surprise there because every one of those markers tell us that they're insulin resistant. They're full-blown diabetics. But the solution may still be pretty simple. For some of these people, they're just insulin resistant. They're just diabetic because there's just a flood. There's a total overwhelm of sugar and carbohydrates in their life. And some of these people, if they cut out the soda and the cookies and the candy, they may be well on their way to improving. Some people are not going to be that lucky. So the first thing we look at is glucose. If the fasting glucose is sky high, we know there's a problem. But we could also have a low or normal fasting glucose and have a problem. That's when we go looking at insulin. Because you could eat a bunch of sugar and you make a bunch of insulin that's enough to lower your glucose. And now you're going to have a low glucose but a high insulin because you're pushing the system. Your system has to work really, really hard to keep that glucose under control. And then once you've done that for a while and you want to lose some weight, now you realize, hey, it's not working so well. So now we go and take the test and you have a fasting glucose of 100, but your insulin is still at 20. So this could be a person that have tried a lot of things. They used to eat a lot of carbs, but they stopped. So now, for several months, there's very little carbs in the system, but their system is still stubborn. Their cells are still insulin resistant. So they could have a score, a HOMA-IR of 5, which is still very high, but not as high as the diabetic. But in a sense, they're more insulin sensitive because they've done a lot of lifestyle changes, but their cells are still not responding. So this person, we have to start looking at their weight loss history and their carb intake. Have they started doing the right things and it's still not working? That's what we're finding a lot of people today who are very insulin resistant, even though they have a low glucose and a low A1C. So those are the people who probably have to do the keto, but it may not be enough even. So who needs to do keto? Well, if you want fast weight loss, then keto is probably going to get it faster than the low carb for most people. If you want to reverse a disease, if you have diabetes, if you have diagnosed diabetes and you want to reverse it, and you want to reverse it fast, then keto is probably going to get it done faster. And if your body is stubborn, then it might be a necessity. Same thing if you have stubborn weight. You've tried a lot of different things, but you lose a few pounds, you plateau, and you're just stuck there. Keto, in this case, might be anywhere from 2% to 10% of carbohydrates, calories from carbohydrates. But you probably also are going to have to add some more things. There are more factors that are producing that are supporting that insulin resistance. So the other one is the frequency of meals. Every time you eat, it's a message to release insulin and to store fat. And if you eat 6 times a day, then that's 6 times that you're storing fat. Intermittent fasting is when you start eating fewer meals and you start going longer between meals, especially overnight. And intermittent fasting is when you start cutting down from 6 meals, you start skipping the snacks, you're down to 3 meals, then you become low carb, you become better fat adapted, your body learns to burn some fat. Now you decide, hey, I'm not so hungry for breakfast, let me skip breakfast, so you eat at noon and at 6. What has happened here is you have turned your feeding window down to 6 hours, which makes your fasting window overnight 18 hours. For 18 hours, you're not eating. Not eating is really low carb. It's 0 carb. And now you're really giving your body a chance to recover. You're giving the cells a chance to become a little hungry for some more glucose. That gives them a chance to burn off some of those fat stores and become insulin sensitive. And 18 hours might do it, or you might have to go longer. So some people push that window down to feeding window to once a day. They might eat for 30 to 60 minutes a day and have an almost 24-hour fasting window. And some people have to go even further or choose to go further because they want to do it faster or their body just isn't responding to the shorter fasts. So some people might go 36 or 48 or even 72 hours or even 7-day fasts. I would suggest that you start slowly and gradually so you get your body used to it and you know how your body responds. Another factor that can help is exercise, because once you increase your heart rate and your blood circulation, now the muscles get hungry and they are starting to accept fuel without so much insulin, which means you're becoming more insulin sensitive. The body doesn't have to produce insulin to make that happen. So exercise is a great thing, and I have some videos on that as well. You want to do low intensity, long duration, plus a little bit of high intensity, extreme high intensity, very, very short, called HIIT, high intensity interval training. And you don't want to do a lot of stuff in the middle, which is what most people do in the gyms. Another factor is stress, and stress puts the body in a state of needing more resources. When you're in fight-flight, your body expects a struggle, so it wants more resources for fuel, so it raises blood sugar, it raises cortisol, which drives blood sugar up, and when blood sugar goes up, so does insulin. So stress actually creates insulin resistance. Where you end up on the continuum and how many of these you have to try depends on how insulin resistant you are and how far you have to go to make it work for you. Some people might reach their goals on a low-carb diet, meaning they don't have to go so low as to get into ketosis, but they eat 50 to 100 grams, they stay physically active, they find the balance even in the low-carb level, or they're not in a hurry. And that would be totally fine if that works for you. The medium to higher carb, though, is probably not going to reverse anything. And this would be for people who already have a high basic metabolic rate, someone who has a low HOMA-IR score, someone who is active, and probably young. It's a program to maintain rather than reverse. And here you could eat anywhere from 20 to 50% depending on your situation, depending on your genetics and all these factors. But you also, if you're young and you do this and it works, you probably want to keep a close eye on it, because you can also develop insulin resistance over time, because your body has a lot of resilience, so it might take 20 years for it to break down. So personally, I would not go as high as 50 unless you're just extremely lean and you're wasting away. But if you have sort of a normal weight, you're reasonably active, then I think you're going to find your best range in the 50 to 100 grams. So let me finish up with an example of how research can tell you the wrong things, because there's a lot of fat phobia in the world today. And when people go low carb, they have to increase their fats. They either increase their fat in itself, or they increase the fat through meats, get fatty meats. But either way, your fats are going to go up, and people are afraid of fats, especially saturated fats. But there's nothing wrong with these things. The problem comes when they do what they call high-fat research. And they said, we took these test subjects or these mice, it could be animals or people, and they say, we put them on a high-fat diet. or even they might even say high fat, low carb. But they feed them 40% of calories from fat, 20 from protein, and 40 from carbohydrates. So this is not a high fat diet, and it's not a low carb diet. It's a terrible diet. And if you had your HOMA-IR down below 1, you could probably get some great results for a long time on that diet. But if you're the least bit insulin resistant, then that 40% of carbohydrate is going to keep your insulin sky high. And if insulin is sky high, you're still in storage mode. And then you add 40% fat to that, and now you're in trouble. So you cannot eat a lot of high fat and high carb at the same time. You gotta pick one. And if you're insulin resistant, then the high carb one, low fat, is not gonna be your model. If you're thin and you wanna eat a lot of vegetables and you wanna go low fat, high carb, you can probably get away with it for a while, but you have to really watch that you're getting enough high quality fats in there to get your essential fatty acids. But when they do research on insulin resistant people and they give them 40% of calories from carbohydrate, they're going to be jacking that insulin way up, and they're creating terrible trouble for that person. So no wonder if they think that is what a high fat diet is, then obviously they're going to draw some bad conclusions about that. These people are going to get very sick. But it's not the fat that creates the problem, it's the insulin. Please leave your comments and questions down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can keep this content coming your way. And finally, please share this with as many people as you can, because there's a lot of people in trouble out there who don't understand the things we're talking about. Thanks for watching.